So I have a very brief little presentation, a little bit about how I got started as an information architect, and then I'm going to kind of segue into why librarians are the coolest people you know, and then I'm going to just sort of go into a little Ask Me Anything, and I'll talk about sort of why that is. So when I got started as an information architect in 2000, I had graduated from library school, and I was working in the library school at UCLA. And my friend Chris Chandler, who was working at a little punk-ass web shop in Santa Monica, called me up and said, it was a Monday in March, he said, "Hey, get this book, read it. Your interview's at 3 on Thursday." So I got the book, which was Lou Rosenfeld and Peter Morville's Information Architecture for the World Wide Web, the book we call the Polar Bear book, and read it and was like, holy shit, this is what I want to be when I grow up. So read the book, devoured the book really, is how that played out, and turned up for my interview, did great, got the job, never looked back. Well, that's not true. We got laid off and I had to look back because I had a mortgage to pay. But, excuse me. What I found is it was a very new profession. We were literally making it up as we went along, right? There were no rules. There were no senior practitioners for us to ask. Chris and I kind of peer mentored our ways into positions of prestige and power over the years. And we've talked about that at other World IA days. But what I found was that library school really prepared me well for being an information architect, because the things that I learned in library school were things like classification and the reference interview, how to deal with metadata and taxonomies, information storage and retrieval, information seeking behavior, which is an amazing field. That was sort of what my area of focus was, is like, how do people use computers and not to find out the information that they need? We talked about access for diverse communities. We talked about inclusion. We talked about privacy. We talked about cross-references, right? All of this stuff is what we do as information architects. And it was really great to find an area that I could apply these skills. And then I believe it was in April of 2000, the first IA Summit was held in Boston. And our guy, Jesse James Garrett, later described that as a room full of people, half of whom were black-clad, tatted and pierced artists, and the other half were sensible shoe-wearing librarians. And everybody was super excited because the artists realized somebody's already done this. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, all the problems that they were struggling with. And the librarians were super excited because here was somebody, a whole new group of people that appreciated and needed and wanted and valued their work, right? So, in recognition of this, I want to, wait, which one of these is forward? This one. I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the foundations, here let me get out of the way, one of the foundations of librarianship, right? So this is Dr. S.R. Ranganathan. He was a mathematician, and he is considered sort of the father of modern librarianship, the founder of modern librarianship. In a hilarious, I did a little bit of research into his life. As I said, he was a mathematician. And in 1923, the University of Madras created a university librarian position because they had a collection. It was in dire need of organization. He had applied for the position, forgotten that he'd applied. Things moved more slowly then. He was asked to come in for an interview, and he didn't really know anything about librarianship, so he looked it up in the Encyclopedia Britannica and read an article on it 3 days later, he went to his interview and got the job. So that was kind of fun. But in 1932, he published The 5 Laws of Library Science. And the thing that is really amazing to me is that these are 5 laws that, yeah, they were published in 1932. They are still relevant and coherent today. So I'm going to sort of talk about those individually. And this is my slideshow, my slide deck, so y'all know, like, that's it. So we're going to look at them one at a time. The first law of library science is books are for use. So if you think about that, in his time, books were so precious that they were literally chained to the shelves. And his position was unchain the books, free the books, right? So they're for people to use. Now, if you think about this in our context, websites, applications, tools, they're for use. They're not art objects, they're not too precious. Edward Tufte in 2005, speaking at the Hammer Museum in Westwood, said, "No one comes to your website for a design experience," right? I mean, of course, unless they do, but, but they're coming to do something. They're coming to use your site. It's not a thing in itself, it's a tool, it's a vehicle, right? So he's talking about making something that people can use. The second law of library science is every reader their book, right? So his position was that the library should serve a wide collection of patrons, meet their needs. The librarian should not apply their judgment to a patron's information need. It's their need, it's not yours, right? So in this sense, right, that really puts the focus on user experience research, on audience-specific content, on accessibility, right? So again, 1932, 2020, still very relevant. The third law is every book its reader. This is the converse of the second law. So his point was, even if only a few people use or need something, right, a book still belongs in the library. You guys are familiar with the 80-20 rule and how it applies to, for instance, websites. It also applies to libraries. 80% of the traffic hits 20% of your content. The remaining 80% of the content serves the needs of the remaining 20% of your users. It's lovely, and it pretty much holds true. So again, this is something that loosely becomes sort of a content strategy, meeting people where they are with what they need, right? It also helps you identify where you can take things out of your collection. Do I have that? Oh, yeah, okay. The fourth law of library science is save the time of the reader. Now, in 1932, he was talking about finding what your customers need and connecting them to it very quickly, right? But I'm taking a much broader perspective on this. So yes, that's very important, connecting your users with what they need on your website and making it easy for them to find what they need. But also, I want to sort of bring in the notion here of the interaction between the site and the user is not the only, that's not just the time. There's fallout if your site is designed badly, and your users will have to spend time dealing with that. Or if your app puts them in danger, your users will have to spend their time dealing with that, right? Ethical practices, no dark patterns, right? If you're forcing your users to click through so that you can serve them more ads and you can collect more information about them, right? You're using their time. And that's in violation of the fourth law. I'm gonna write you a ticket. But also questions about privacy, questions about safety, right? Don't make problems that your users have to then solve. And to my point of view, my way of thinking, this really makes a coherent argument for a lot of diversity on our teams, our design and development teams, because if you bring in diversity perspective, then you can identify problems before launch, and that's really helpful. I have an example, but I'm going to save that for one-on-one conversations. The fifth and last law of library science is that the library is a growing organism. It's a dynamic institution. How many of y'all know the difference between librarians and archivists? Yeah, all the librarians in the room. So this is kind of a joke in library school. They tend to be trained by the same program. And what the key difference is that librarians will weed their collection. They will cut stuff. So I'm here to say to you, be a librarian, weed your collection, tend it like a garden, right? You can prune stuff, you can replant things, you can tear out a whole bed and fertilize it and replant it with new things. Sometimes you have to divide plants, right? Think about your collection as a garden. Your application is an operation. Tend it, put in new content, do ongoing research and metrics, examine your metrics, sunset that dead content, reorganize things that have grown by accretion to the point where the stuff is unfindable, right? So going to hidden in plain sight. What did I mean by that? What I mean is that good IA and good librarianship, both, are invisible to your users. It doesn't get in the way, right? And that doesn't happen on its own. I mean, it's really hard to make it invisible. And that's where you guys come in. So you bring the structure, you bring the organization, you bring the metadata, you bring the ethics, you bring the inclusion. It's you. You guys do the hard work of making a site or an application or a tool easy to use, clear to understand. All of that is your work. So I want to say, go out there and do the work. That's it. That's what I've got. Few more minutes, and I thought that, if you had questions, because you're not all librarians, and I would be happy to take questions. I don't know how much time I have left for my little slot, but let's fill it up with questions. No question. Yes, a brave soul. I'm sorry, I should have warned the team that I was going to do this first. It's been a hell of a week, folks. All right.
So when it comes to saving time for the reader or user, when it comes to complex processes like doing your taxes or buying health insurance, how do you strike that balance between making it simple and efficient and making them feel like they're still making a good, well thought out decision?
That's a good question. A lot of it involves sort of keeping the scent of information strong. So as long as they feel like they're getting closer to their goal, they will click forever, right? So, but it's more about keeping the choices clear, understanding the consequences of the choice, right? And how do you get to that? User research.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Any other questions? Anything? Jeremy.
Hi, thank you. I'm curious on, obviously your passion for libraries is really important and it comes through. And so this is a little outside of the kind of UX and how we use it there, but how do we support libraries as designers here more than maybe some of the obvious ways?
You can use them. That's a good start. Go to the library, check things out. A lot of libraries actually have, one of the measures of success, right? The success metrics for libraries is in fact circulation. So go to the reference desk and ask a question. They'll mark a little tally down, right? Even if it's just where's the bathroom. Right? Right? helps. There's a whole column for registering those questions. You can, if you have LAPL or Santa Monica Public Library, I'm sure most of the other libraries in town have these. They have a lot of ebooks. You can get books through the library for free on your Kindle or your phone. So those are sort of their primary ways. You can hold public events at the library. There's a lot of different ways. You can become a friend of the library. You can volunteer. I'm between jobs right now, and so one of the things that I'm doing is volunteering as an adult literacy tutor, right? It's a great way to meet people and make a difference in somebody's life. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. We have some questions back here. This gentleman here on the aisle.
Hi, my name is Jong Ho. I'm a UX designer.
Okay, let's wait till the microphone comes and then everyone can hear. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, my name is Jong Ho. I'm a UX designer. And my question for you would be, as a UX designer, like some companies that I have worked for, or the companies that I heard about, let's just say they have lack of resources. And then, to me, information architecture is actually a big part of my life as a UX designer. But some companies, because of the situation, they just say, I mean, like, depending on like who you have, up there, spend 2 hours, 1 hour at the desk, create information architecture, and then move on to create beautiful checkout.
Right.
So, do you have any advice on how to best practice information architecture in that limited resources in any companies?
So that's a very good question, right? And it's one I think we all struggle with pretty hard to varying degrees. The thing that I've found that's been most effective is to start small, but measurable. So first you benchmark the existing experience, and then you information architect the hell out of it, and then you measure what happened, right? And then you can use that as evidence for pitching further engagement and further involvement. It doesn't always work. There's a concept called UX maturity level, and it sort of maps out where a company or where an institution is in their acceptance and embrace of the principles of user experience design. And if you look into that question, there's often recommendations for sort of how you can help them move to the next level. All right, does that help?
Yeah, totally, thank you.
Thank you. There was another question over here on the side.
Thank you. This may be a little off topic, but libraries have become synonymous with our homelessness crisis.
Indeed.
And I know you were talking a little bit about what you're doing around adult literacy. Are there other things that we can do to be part of the solution as a field of expertise?
You know what, we have here in the audience, Karen and Rita from LA Tech for Good, and they described it to me as OkCupid for tech and social justice. Talk with them. I think they would have some good ideas about how to make that happen. But just sort of be open, and I know that Lex Roman is also doing a lot of work around homelessness in this area, so perhaps you could reach out to her. There's a lot of different opportunities. I teach a class in user experience design, and I bring in nonprofits for class projects. So the students come out with something for their portfolio that's real. The nonprofit gets some free consulting work, right? And then the benefit of that rolls out to the people. So just like, there's a lot of different ways that you can help, and just kind of being open and flexible to those it's kind of what I would recommend. Does that help?
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, right? Yeah, one more. Who gets it? Wow, I have answered all the questions. No, it looks like there's one more. All right, thank you.
I'm curious a little bit about do you get involved with wireframing tools and prototyping, or do you use different kind of documentation when you're
I haven't had a wireframe in years, and the last time I did, they laughed at it, which was fine. I was like, yes, never asking me to do this again. I do most of my work, honestly, I do most of my work in Excel or Google Sheets, Google Docs. I don't really, like, I could learn a tool, right? I fear no tool. If you want me to use this, I will try and use this. But for the last 10 years, really, the bulk of my work has been done in Word and Excel. Sorry about that. I wish I could be more helpful in directing you on the tools.
No, that's really helpful, because I was just curious about, like, if you were in a department where mature design practice, so you'd be the dedicated IA, and then those would be the tools you'd work with, and then you'd hand off your discoveries over to a UX designer.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's pretty much how it is. I would make a recommendation and then work with the designer. Yeah, I was lucky that way. So, thank you guys so much for having me.